Okay, I see that we're streaming live on Facebook. So I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, April 16th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. I now call the Fairfield City School District regular board meeting to order. Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bagley?
Here.
Mr. Birding? Mr. Birding?
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum?
Here.
Mrs. O'Neill?
Here.
Mrs. Shorter?
Here.
Okay, thank you all. Mrs. Shorter, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I do have a flag behind me, and there's also one on the screen. I see that Mr. Smith also has one in his office.
Okay. All right. So if you could stand and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which
which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Shorter.
You're welcome.
First item on our agenda is presentations and resolutions. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Birding, members of the board. We do have 4 presentations scheduled this evening. Our first presentation this evening will be covering some information about the district's move to electronic forms and reporting. This time, I'll turn it over to Mandy Aug and Jeff Madden.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Members of the board, I'm going to attempt to share my screen so you have that, but you should have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well. Just give me a minute to see if I can share the screen. Can you guys see the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, thank you. So this is a project that is actually really timely in terms of the conversation. We didn't predict the COVID-19 shutdown, but this conversation was before that, and it has helped in this process a little bit, and I'll explain a little bit. But we wanted to share with the board some steps that we've taken and will continue to take into next year about trying to streamline our paperwork that we ask parents to fill out at the beginning of the year and even throughout the year when it comes to how we collect information, student information, addresses, phone numbers, field trip permission slips, senior graduation items. Just there's a lot of paperwork, and as you know, at the beginning of the year, a tremendous amount of paperwork that parents complete, and they often have. I mean, think about how many times you have to write your address down on a form for your children. If you have 2 or 3, 4 children, you're doing this hundreds of times probably throughout the year. So we started to have some dialogue around that really for a number of years, but we really made some progress this year. And that's what this conversation will be about. And just a quick, I guess, overview of the topics is that we want to give the board and the community an idea of what paperless means. We're not going to go 0 to 100 overnight. And we want to let families know that, to let everyone know that there's a scope out there that we'll cover in terms of where we think we're going to land to start this year and where we hope to go through future years. One of the big pieces in that is, like I just mentioned, our parent forms and student registration. We also anticipate making some changes in our report card and midterm progress reporting. And again, we'll end on some thoughts of where we hope to go with this paperless concept. I guess the first topic is in terms of what does paperless mean. It doesn't mean that our children will turn in every assignment electronically. It does not mean that every form will be electronic. The purpose is at first fold to make our process easier for parents. I think we went through this lens and said, think about the number of forms that we ask parents to fill out and how many times a year we ask them. And then we kind of part two to this process is think about how much data all of our secretaries and our clerks have to enter in. And just as you walk through how we've handled things, making an address change or a phone number change in particular, if you have 3 children and they're in 3 different buildings, the way our process currently works is that you have to make that request in 3 different buildings. 3 different people on our end have to touch that request and make the change into our student information system. We thought that was pretty intense over one phone number change, and people go through phone number and address changes and all sorts of changes throughout the year, requests that come in. So we wanted to make it easier on our parents first. Secondly, we wanted to free up staff in terms of what their workload is to do other things that are more important than just data entry. Another piece is that we know when we communicate, if we don't have accurate information in a time of emergency or a time of a need to communicate to parents, if we don't have that updated quickly, then we're not reaching all of our parents. So our process, our purpose and scope of work will be first focused on how we can make this easier for parents and how we can make our student data, our information around student data, make it quickly available to be updated on all ends. So scope of work will be really focused on those beginning of the year forms that are at this point, forms that are universal, emergency medical forms. Some of our athletics, if you have any children in athletics, they've already implemented this and they have for a number of years. So it's really taking that process that is done under the athletic program and expanding it to all students. So we're not unfamiliar with this in the athletic world, in extracurricular world. This is really just building upon that. In terms of parent access, we realized through this process is that we're going to have to capture an email address for every parent. At the beginning of the year, one of the big pieces in here is to get the emergency medical and parent contact information. And they're not going to fill out a piece of paper for this year. They're going to go online and have to do these forms online. We will meet our parents where they are, and we will allow our parents to come into the district office. We will allow them to come into the building if they need to. If they don't have access to a computer, we can help them out with that access to fill out those forms. We'll promote the library in terms of an option. We will work with our parents to make sure that the forms can be completed online. And we feel honestly is that that's going to be a better form of making sure that we get this information anyway. So we realize that there are going to be some obstacles for parents, and we'll meet them where they are. And in many ways, like we've done with our student technology under the shutdown, we have reached out to families. If there's a need, we will work one-on-one with the family to make sure it happens. Let me get into a little bit of specific detail in terms of where we are and where we want to go in the short term. And I've covered a lot of this already, so I won't repeat myself. But I think a big part is number C, the reduction in duplicate information. Again, how many times are you entering that phone number, that address, your signature on forms? Letter D there, it says parents can register their child from home. We've actually started, that is going on right now. They're not using our format. Our format right now is through the mail and through email. But as we move forward, our registration will be done online. And what makes it kind of neat is that currently we're paper pencil. So a parent comes in and fills out 7 pages of information. We take that information and we transfer that. We look at the paper and we type that information into our system. We know that human error exists in that process, and we think this process is going to be a little bit more accurate, gives parents the opportunity to check their work before they submit it electronically. There's fields where they can't make mistakes, and so that's going to happen for next year, kindergarten registration, our parents who are registering for kindergarten, they're using the online system for student registration. It allows us to take the forms that, your birth certificate, driver's license, they can take a picture of that and they can scan that and upload it from their house. And it's really, like I said, it was accidental that we started to implement this, but it's going to be it likely is going to be an important feature to have for kindergarten registration and registration in general this summer. We don't know what things look like, and so we're a little ahead of the curve to be able to do this remotely. And integration with student data with other platforms. As we've expanded our technology with student one-to-one in the secondary level, and all the different, as we have learned through this process of not being at school and working remotely, all the different applications that students use, teachers use, parents use, Google Classroom, Remind, OneCall. There's a lot of different platforms that have to communicate with each other. We believe this process will help streamline and coordinate those systems and to make sure all the data that's being stored is being pulled from an accurate data set that gets pushed out to all those different platforms. So that's a piece to where we're hoping parents won't have to go into the Remind app and enter their information. They want to go into the school and do their changes. One-stop shop that can be pushed out to all the different platforms that we're going to be using. Mandy, I'll turn things over to you in terms of the progress reports and midterms.
So one of the things that we feel like we can do now that we're going to have, consistent access to parent emails, and we know that parents will have access to Progress Book, is to change the way that we report interims. Many districts actually have discontinued this practice over the past several years. We did a small survey, 17 schools around us, and only 3 of them still print and send home progress reports. And the reason for that is very simple. Several of you are Progress Book users. You know that as soon as we print, and by the time we mail home progress reports or they get sent home with students, they're out of date already because Progress Report is real-time, a real-time grade book. And so, this is something this is a practice that we feel like we can discontinue. And it has the added benefit for our students on an IEP will now be progress monitored every 9 weeks instead of every 5 weeks. It's very difficult to get a good read on the growth of a student when you're, progress monitoring them, every 4 or 5 weeks to mail home a progress report. So we feel like this change will also give us a little bit more of accurate reporting data to share with parents about the progress of their students who are on an IEP. And then, like Jeff said, we're not going from 0 to 100 in terms of, going completely paperless. So, even though we're not going to print and send home midterm reports anymore, this is not going to have an effect on our report cards at this time. We will continue to print report cards at the end of each quarter. We'll continue to send those home with students, and if this shift is going well, and in the future, if we want to, end up just sending home 4th quarter report cards at the end, we can do that, but again, it's a process. We don't feel like we're ready to jump to that point yet. So report cards for the end of the quarter will continue to stay the same. And I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Mandy. And just a final note on that point is that with the requirement that beginning of the year forms will be done online, we are going to be really forced to capture every parent's email address, and that will allow them to get those updates about how to get on the Progress Book. We've learned that not every parent is a regular user of Progress Book, which is okay. We think it's a valuable tool. We think by capturing all those email addresses, working hard to make sure we've got that in place, will increase almost full utilization of Progress Book. We can also run reports to determine if parents are checking Progress Book. So if they're not, then we can send specific reminders to those parents or reach out to those parents individually and say, hey, you know, we noticed that you haven't checked your child's report card online, or you haven't logged in to see your child's grades. We just want to make sure that you understand how to access it. So I think we'll have that ability to communicate digitally, where we don't have it as in depth as what we could right now. You know, we send home a lot of paper, and we don't know if it ever gets looked at this point. There's a good chance that that paper we send home lands not in the parents' hands. So we think actually by going this direction, we're increasing communication significantly with it. Just the last, point, and I don't want to put Mandy back on the spot. I think we all know that as we go one-to-one with technology, we do see us to be able to expand in a paperless world, to be able to complete assignments online and to submit things to where they are being sent electronically. Just in my own recent enrollment in a college course, everything is submitted online. And so I think that we'll utilize that in the future as we expand our technology in the district for students. I mentioned that we're going to start with some universal forms that all buildings or all grade levels do, like all elementary forms, all secondary forms. We hope to get into more specifics to where we can put a fourth grade form on there that's being done at East Elementary that other fourth grade forms may not have, specific field trip forms. As we get to know the system and can utilize its capabilities, we think we can get very targeted with grade levels and with departments and with certain students. So almost all of our forms can go online. So we know we can't be there overnight, and we realize that we may never be totally paperless, but the goal is to just find those avenues and opportunities and plug in where it makes sense. I'll turn it over to the board there for questions.
I just have one question. First of all, I'm glad we're moving in this direction. This is great to hear. And hopefully parents and caregivers are happy with this change, because it is a lot of paperwork throughout the year. So I'm glad that we're simplifying it. Kind of looking even further, will you, if you have a kindergartner all the way through 12th grade, will you still have to input everything every single year, or will you, if you input it all in first grade and second grade, then does it say, like, is this information the same, or do you start over from second grade and re-enter everything?
So it'll be pre-populated. So you will have to go in every year and say, yes, this is an accurate phone number.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
So it will be, you'll save a lot of time. And you'll have the option right then to update that information if it isn't inaccurate.
That's great.
I have a question. If it's a question for you, can you guys hear me? All right, great. Since we've been using the Remind tool due to the school closures and such, it seems to be a pretty good tool. And I'm just wondering about the versatility of Remind and versus Progress Book. I mean, Progress Book is a great tool for grade tracking, but I'm not sure if every single teacher uses Progress Book. It seems that a lot of teachers are more, I don't know, I think they're kind of like in Remind more. It seems that most teachers that my kids have had prefer to use Remind, or at least they use Remind. Is there a way to sort of integrate Remind within Progress Book? And what I mean by that is, instead of sending information through Progress Book, can you send those reminders through the Remind tool with the Progress Book link? It seems to be a tool that's a little bit more user-friendly. It's going straight to your text messages, or you can actually have the Remind app. It seems to be a tool that could be utilized with Progress Book to sort of help Progress Book live up to its full potential. Is that something that you guys have noticed, looked at, thought about? Because I'm really liking Remind messages and that whole interface a lot more than I like traditional tools. And I just think those two things could work well together.
Mandy, you unmuted first, so I think you're the winner.
And I only unmuted to say I don't know for sure because I'm not as familiar with Remind as I am with Progress Book. So, you know, I don't know if I'm certain that you can send a link to Progress Book through Remind. I don't know if that would be unique though to your student, or if it would just kind of take you to the, you know, Progress Book portal to log in to then view your students' work. So, and I, you know, just as a teacher who used Progress Book, and it has been a few years, you're right. I mean, I used it really for my grades because everything else was kind of clunky. You know, so I bet that's why some teachers just kind of, that's their grade book, but then they use these other tools to communicate. They just have different functions and features that, you know, meet their need there. So I didn't really answer your question. I just kind of told you the limited things that I know. So maybe Jeff can jump in.
I can tell you just from my work with Remind and launching it that, excuse me, that's something that can be done, but it would just take them to the home screen of Progress Book because it, like you said, Mandy, it would be unique to each individual student because everybody's got an individual ID and password to get in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
May I ask a clarifying question, Belina? I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that you prefer communication via Remind versus Progress Book communication as a parent? Is that accurate?
I prefer to actually get, you know, there are notifications. Teachers use it pretty effectively in sending out information about assignments because it's kind of cumbersome to go into Progress Book.
Gotcha.
It's much more efficient because there's the Remind app. I'm getting it in forms of a text. So I get it, my kids get it. It's all of their notifications for assignments. And we were, you know, this was happening before the school closures. And it just seems to be a much better way to keep a catalog of what's coming up. So for me, having a student that does have an IEP, it's really important for me to see what's going on, you know, to see those assignments. And I can definitely say it's a lot better to have the Remind tool for getting that information rather than logging into Progress Book to see what's coming up. Because like I said, not every teacher uses it. It seems the Remind portal, I don't know, I think they may prefer that more. I don't want to speak for the teachers, but I'm just saying it's a cleaner and a much more streamlined tool for getting information about what's coming up for your student, particularly if you have students that require a little extra help and organization in that. That's just been my experience.
Right.
And I have a senior, so I've done this for a while.
Okay, yeah, I just that's helpful, and I just want to make sure I was capturing your perspective. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Shorter, I think your comment question is really it hits home as to where we need to look at. So I don't think we're there. We're not there because we're using two different platforms. So I think you've given us a perfect homework assignment in terms of this integration to figure out what on the user end, on the parent end, what is making sense and how are we doing things twice? How can we streamline that? We're probably a little tied to Progress Book because I think that's tied to our grade book. It's tied to a bigger system, but it doesn't mean that we can't find a way to go to Remind and find the better system there. So I think it's a good homework assignment that we'll have to work on.
I had a question, and Jeff, you kind of hit on it there. So what platform will all this be done on, the data entry of all this information?
So this platform is going to be on Final Forms, is the platform. Final Forms, there's a program out there, and years ago we used to call that Progress Book. It's now called SI. You may have been around in the educational jargon to hear the term DAZZLE, but that's our student. Those are terms I'm throwing at you. That's our student database. Final Forms does communicate with our main student database, and it didn't used to in all areas. So they have really expanded, and now it does. And so that's why we went with Final Forms. Athletics has used them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that data, if you have a student that has participated in an extracurricular, you're going to already be a little bit ahead because that data will already be in there. So that's some of the work we're doing now is integrating where we are and expanding it to the entire district. But Final Forms is that platform.
Okay, and I have used it before, and it was fairly easy to use, and of course it'll be in a whole different format for what we're doing here. My other question is, we have families that have social economic challenges, maybe even language barriers. Is there a contingency for how they might sign up if they just out of fear or the unknown refuse to participate in this?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is couple-fold. I'm sure if someone flat out refuses, we will work with them and honor that as best as we can. I hope we don't have that, but I think it could happen, and we'll work through that. I think another part of this is pretty cool is that Final Forms can take all of our words, our documents, and convert them to like 160 different languages. So a parent will be able to choose their language pretty quickly, which is better service than what we can provide now with our paper forms. So another reason why we went with them is we thought that was a nice feature for our parents.
Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Madden and Mrs. Ogg. Next item on the agenda is facility planning update, and Mr. Smith.
Yes, our second and third presentations will be completed by Joe Penny. This evening, he'll be providing the board with additional information in regard to facility planning update. If you recall, at our last meeting, Joe initiated that discussion. The board had some questions, wanted some additional information. So we've met a couple times since then, and that's the purpose of part 2 of that presentation. And then in addition, he will be talking about building our future 2.0. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Joe.
First on there is Yvonne Edwards. Yvonne has served.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. One moment, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation here and share my screen. I did that in the wrong order. Let's see here. Screen. Share. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and back up again. Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, members of the board. I've returned this evening for further discussion regarding the proposed 5-year facility maintenance plan. As I believe all of you are aware, Todd Thackeray with SHP, our consultant, is with us tonight also. So any more technical questions, he can most likely jump in and support those. At the last meeting, I provided information about the facility assessment process and how the findings contributed to the creation of the 5-year facility master plan, maintenance plan. I would like to begin where we left off last meeting, focusing on the 5-year facility maintenance plan document that has been included in this evening's packet. So as far as on the screen, I'll flash up the overview of the 5-year budget plan, similar to what we had last meeting, but I would like to go ahead and go to the handout. I didn't actually include the handout in the actual PowerPoint presentation just because of the level of detail that's included within this document. So since this last meeting, as Mr. Smith mentioned, I need to provide additional information as requested by the board, and also to provide clarity and so we can have better discussions. So I've updated this document with the request information as well as additional details. Before we get into this, I'd like to just mention additionally that we see this as a living document, this 5-year plan, and it's a foundation for our future. We started this process approximately a year ago in trying to make sure we did the most thorough facility assessment possible. Typically, schools do facility assessments just on school buildings alone, especially when we're looking at master plan and so forth. And we went ahead and tried to encompass everything we possibly could, including non-school school building facilities. So that's all part of this. The estimates that are built within it are conservative, and that's for strategic purposes. And then as we look at this document, we'll have to kind of apply it to today's world with the pandemic we're in and so forth, and completion dates and completion during uncertain times with contractors, materials, and so forth. So, and financial uncertainties. So there's all kinds of things come into play with regards to this plan. But the great news about the plan is it's a foundation for our future, being that living document. And we're able to go down through for years to come and keep on adding to it and carrying on projects year to year, and will give us that strong foundation. So there's some things I want to say up front. I'd like to begin by actually discussing the document and then open the floor for guidance and discussion in regards to this 5-year plan with the board. So I'd like to start in the left-hand corner. Proposed budget amount, 5 years. We're at $14,700,357. And then there's a 4-year section. And the reason why I include a 4-year section is our current forecast is only includes 4 years of this plan. The 5th year of our plan actually will be part of the forecast November 2020. So I have the numbers included across there and what the difference is between the current forecasted amount and the budgeted amount. The items that I include in here in this document, there's many of them, but highlighted items. Last meeting, the document that I provided had just highlighted or select items from the list. It wasn't the full list that encompassed the amount of money or the total shown. So now you'll see items on the list that the ones in white were on the prior list. The ones that are in yellow are the ones that were added on. Now these items were all, as I mentioned, were always part of the actual total. They were just not included in other documents just to have a more simplified document to put in front of everyone. So this evening, those are included. There's an inflation rate column all the way to the right. You'll notice in FY21, the first year, there's no inflation built in because the numbers that we have are based on estimates from today. But obviously, as years go on, we went ahead and applied a 5% inflation rate to those numbers for each year out from FY21. And these are for our estimates. Went ahead and ranked the items within the document for each fiscal year. Now this will be a fluid document. As needs arise, we'll change things, move things around, as I'm calling it a fluid living document. But there are ranking of items of what I consider high importance. And then another column is warm, safe, and dry. And that safe is in regards to structural, and it's in regards to the building. So the third column, you'll notice, has WSD and there's asterisks. So there's certain line items that were categorized, or I categorized, as being warm, safe, dry items. So I also want to go down to the bottom of the first page, and you'll notice at the bottom of the columns, there's total funding year amounts, and it has without contingency in one row, without contingency and non-construction costs, and there's a column or a row with contingency and non-construction costs. Okay, so those are two values that have been added also, and the number that actually is part of the proposed budget for each year is going to be on the more conservative route, which includes the contingency and non-construction costs in regards to these estimates, which accounts for about a 16% increase of the number. So before I open this up for discussion, so we can talk about the views and thoughts in regards to this plan, I also wanted to point out some focus items that we really need to seriously look at this year. And I covered some of these last board meeting. There is some roof work that needs to be done. There's also some HVAC work. And for those top items, for instance, the roof at Creekside, parts of it, the 400 wing, the roof repair maintenance at South, roof repair maintenance at Crossroads. We have estimates coming in now through purchasing cooperative programs that are already pre-bid through those purchasing cooperative programs, and preliminary numbers are showing under projection at this point. And then also for Crossroads, the HVAC control system as well as the boiler, both original from 1978. We have preliminary numbers coming in right now for those projects, and they're currently under the projected budget also. So right now they're preliminary, but as I mentioned toward the beginning of this, that because of the uncertain times and because some contractors have members that aren't currently working, some are backlogged, sometimes there's some material issues, so forth. These are things that, depending on decisions that are made, or discussions that are had this evening, I'll most likely be bringing back to you very soon at probably the next board meeting to talk about taking action on, so that way we can get these projects moving through the summer. So at this point, I'd love to open it up to discussion amongst the board members and just talk about the overall plan and your thoughts.
Comments from board members?
Mr. Penny, do you have the ability to put what we're looking at from our packet onto the screen?
I can't, I'm not sure how it's going to look as far as formatting because it's so small, but I'll do my best. Can you still see my screen, or is it the PowerPoint?
It's the existing PowerPoint.
Okay.
Well, while you're looking at that, I do have another question. So what are we really talking about tonight? You want, whether it's this board meeting or the next, you want approval for the top 10 items, or are we looking for just approval to start moving forward with quoting?
Well, through the discussion, I was hoping to receive some guidance. Overall, and it can be a collaborative, obviously, process, but overall for FY21, all the items that were identified through a facility assessment as being things that are focus items that we need to get accomplished, we ended up with 32 of them. But as we go down through the rankings, we find that there's some that can be delayed, put off, and so forth. These are things we've identified as important items for us to do as a district. Currently, we have the 1.9, well, closer to $2 million budget allocated for this funding year. And for all the items, and this is with the conservative budgeting proposal that we have, we were at 3.2. Mathematically, we're looking at the top, let's say 17, 18 items could be accomplished within that $2 million. But looking at it, we may come under, like I said, some of these budget numbers. For next board meeting, I just want to throw that in. Most likely I'll be bringing back for us to approve, working with purchasing cooperative or approve bids for the roofing work as well as the HVAC work at Crossroads. And there may be other things that, if necessary to bid or have board action on, that I'll be bringing back very soon to the board so we can get moving on them as quickly as possible. So this evening is just overall thoughts regarding the plan itself.
Okay, let me ask another question.
Yes.
In terms of the rank, did you rank them in order of importance or in order that you want them to come, you want them to happen? So I see that the roofing, and that's important, and that's at the very top, but then we have 4 items that are ice guards, snow gym roof ice guards. They're still near the top of this list. Is that important that those get done now, or what was the thought process there?
Well, they were ranked by importance, but in this first year, just based on it being the new facility assessment, majority of the items, especially the top, going down through here, say top 12, a lot of them are somewhat interchangeable. Obviously, the loading dock fill, which we already had a $10,000 allocation to the academy to fix a wall that was there anyway, that's crucial for us to get the middle school academy going because we have the entrance there. So that was planned, and we'll have that taken care of. But as far as the ranking of the items themselves, those top items are crucial. For instance, I would say the Crossroads HVAC controls and the 1970, or the boiler, and both of those being original 1978, I could interchange them with item number 2. I'd hate to say number 1 because it's essential we have the loading dock area just filled and ready so students can, attend the academy that we're working on for the junior high or the middle school this upcoming year. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I understand the top 10, but again, the snow guards versus, if you go further down the list, district paving plan, shouldn't that be in front of the snow guards or the ice guards?
Well, some of it will be subjective. The snow guards, the reason why those are so important is because we've seen on our video camera security system that there were sheets of ice that slid off those new roofs, which could end up being extremely dangerous for the students or anyone that would be walking under that area. So we really want to get those taken care of. Now we believe with that we budgeted conservatively on that. So we're supposed to have numbers back on those most likely next week or the week after, like formal numbers, not estimates. So, but that's why that would be ahead of the district paving plan. District paving plan is essential because we continuously maintain our paving and we don't want to get off the track of doing so. And typically, or in the past, we've had $300,000 budgeted. That was part of the original plan that I believe Mr. Weiser put in place probably upwards 5-6 years ago. And after that time period, it would go down to 225. What we found based on the square footage and the amount of paving we have, we'd really like to get that up to 300,000 again because we have the need to do so to maintain all of our lots. So that's why the budget proposal increased there. As far as importance, that's why the snow gym roof ice guards are above that district paving plan, just because in my mind it's a safety issue.
And if I could just say a few things, when we started this process, even Joe's last presentation, a lot has changed since then. Since we started this process, since he put together his first presentation, we just find ourselves in a completely different place. Nancy and I have had a lot of conversation already, along with some of our other team members, about the future and the financial piece. In light of everything that's happening, across the country, but certainly in our state, and revenues, and what does that mean for us in the future. So, like I said, we're pretty concerned about, the future and financials as a result of what's happening, not just in our community, but in the state and the country. So tonight, just want to kind of lay out kind of what I'm envisioning in this process. I'd like to, want to give the board an opportunity just to look at this list, to hear about, the cost if we completed all of these, to know what is budgeted. And if we completed all of this, the cost that would come in. Just wanted to give the board an opportunity to see the items that are being discussed, the cost, but also want the board to know that we are still, and now probably, going to take a more critical look at some of these items. But again, wanted to hear from the board about, how do you feel about that approach? And how do you feel about, if we work hard to stay in within that budget that we had, knowing then that there are some projects that need to be done that may not get done. And then, you'd have to think about putting those into the next year, but you're going to run into the same thing the following year, because then some of those things are going to be pushed back. So, we talk about that balance, trying to, we want to take care of our facilities, but we want to be fiscally responsible. We're feeling some pressure with the physical piece, extra pressure. We always try to be fiscally responsible. Nancy does a great job in that area, leading all of us, the team, that we've adopted that philosophy. And even, like I said, even more so now given the current circumstances. So just wanted to share kind of the process, but wanted to just put that out there and give the board an opportunity to weigh in and give us your thoughts on kind of what we're doing here. And do you, give you a chance to ask some questions. And Brian's a good question about the rank and that, but also big picture, would like to hear from the board about moving forward and kind of what your thoughts are. So I hope that makes sense.
I have a question. Yes, I see what you're saying, and I definitely, I get it. Nancy, what percentage of the maintenance funds from the building construction, I'm assuming that those maintenance funds can only be used for the buildings, for the new buildings themselves? I can't remember if you said it was only the new buildings or if we could use them for other buildings. And what percentage was that?
So the maintenance fund, maybe the majority of it, yes, should be used on Compass Central Freshman, but there is a piece of that maintenance fund that can be used to maintain our other buildings. And so as we collect taxes, that money's put into a separate fund. And I want to say almost maybe 2/3 of it can be used for just those 3 new buildings, and the remainder can be used at our current buildings, at all the rest of the buildings. So yes, there is some funds available to do some of these projects that are on the list.
Okay, and this is an interest-bearing fund, so we're getting a little extra on top of that on what the principal is, I'm assuming.
It's all within our big pot of money. Yes, it's just in a separate fund. So it is, every time we get a tax payment from the county auditor, there is money that's split that goes into that fund.
Okay. I do have one question, because I agree, the ranking on this, we may agree or disagree on some of the items, but have we gone through and assessed some of those parts that might not necessarily be a cost that's borne only upon the district? I'm looking at item number 22, This is at Crossroads. It doesn't have a ranking. It's lower down, but it's the sewer to Donald repair allowance. Have we spoke with the Butler County the Butler County Engineering Department? Is that a cost that's completely on us, or could it be that only a portion might be on us? I mean, for items like that where it's pertaining to a sewer, is that totally 100% ours, or is that something that could be borne by county engineers?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. We work closely with Fairfield City, and in regards to this item, it was as we did this facility assessment that we found that we do have an issue at times with the sewer going out there. What we found at this point is it's more on our building side. Regardless, this is just an allowance so we can start exploration and exploring the actual issue.
So this is just
not
exploration.
Huh?
So this is just exploration. This is not the cost to actually mitigate it, or the full cost for mitigation.
It's a proposed cost to it. Todd, do you have any feedback on this one?
Not much, other than you have to do the investigation before you know the full extent and where it is and who could be responsible for it. And we don't know at this point. All we know is there is a problem periodically.
I think the question is the $25,000. It says repair allowance. Does that cover? Is that a cost to cover the exploration? Is that an approximate cost to explore plus repair? Or
the hope is that it covers the exploration and the repair, but until you explore, you don't know what you have. So it could be, well, it's probably not too high, but you just don't know. You can't see underground until you do the augering and the cameraing and, spend the money to have someone provide that service to see what you have and have a better understanding. So hopefully it covers both. We just can't guarantee it until we do it.
So it's something that we'd want to explore regardless.
Okay. I did have a question about, and forgive me for, wanting to know just the details. I understand that we have this overview, or the broad discussion is, are we moving forward? What does the board think? I think the ranking is good. I also think there's probably some that, it should really come down to, what's really pertinent, because I'm looking at your number 8 and you have gymnasium wall there, structural repairs, and those are listed out at 40 or 50,000. And I would want to know, is that something that we'd want to just move up? It seems like there are some items, if it's a structural item, such as a roof repair, gymnasium wall, I don't think you really have any choice. I don't think those are items that you can, feel that you can put off. So I think it's structural items that basically pertain to this warm, safe, and dry. I don't see those as being items that we can really forestall. And I guess I would want to see, these are optional things and these are things that we must do. Outline it like that, because I don't think you have any choice except to take care of things such as that. When you say structural repairs and it's a gymnasium wall, I don't know. I mean, what size are the cracks? It's what is the extent of the structural repair? That sounds like that's not an optional item. It sounds like that's a must-do item without having all the details. But maybe that's what needs to happen, is structural items need to be listed as this is what we have to do, there's not an option there.
Well, if you'd like, I can kind of tackle it just through the discussion. These top items, for instance, like the structural repairs for that gymnasium wall, it has been assessed, has been looked at. Those are items that we have a budget in place of $1.9 million, going on $2 million. Those items are crucial, and those are items that we plan to move forward with unless there's a major reason why we shouldn't. So when you look at the top items on this list, those are ultimately items that we want to carry through based on our facility assessment and our findings. The other items on the list are items that we feel are important, as you get all down the list. And there's few that subjectively could interchange, but we feel are all important to do. But those top items, so many items, especially like you said, the warm, safe, dry, structural, those that we want to carry out.
And I'll just share that crack at the gym had been looked at about 10 years ago by a structural engineer who originally designed the building and determined that at that point it was not a danger. And at this point, there's been a little further cracking. So at this point, the recommendation is to repair it, but understand it is not in danger. It's not endangering anyone at this point.
What's the width? What's the length of it?
It's a diagonal crack from the northeast corner on the inside of the gym that goes, it starts sort of above door height and cracks back toward the west. And it's a half-inch crack. There's been some settlement in the foundation through there, a slight amount. So anyway, but the nice thing is it's a bearing wall. It's a masonry bearing wall, so gravity and the weight of it is a large part of its stability. And it still works, but it should be repaired.
Okay.
I
And is
agree
it
with you on that. Sorry. I mean, I think I appreciate that you've, Mr. Penny, that you've pulled out the warm, safe, and dry with the little asterisks. I feel like those things, kids should be able to come to school in a warm, safe, and dry environment. And so those things, I don't know how optional they are. The other things I feel like are probably things we can push off. It'd be great to know if we tackled all the warm, safe, and dry items, are we in budget? Are we not in budget? How far? Where does that leave us?
If you go down to item 17, and because I did this earlier today, that puts us at about $1.9 million, and that's based on conservative estimate. When I say conservative estimate, that's our proposed budget item line. So that doesn't include like the contingency design part at the very bottom, and adding that percentage. Not all those items will have that. So you're at about 16 or 17 on the item list where you get to the actual money that's appropriated for budget this year.
And Joe, that includes all of those items, even the ones that don't have the asterisks out to the side. So, for example, the district paving plan would be included, right?
That is correct. What I did when I looked at it earlier was I literally highlighted the columns down to see where that line would hit of being within budget, and that's where I ended up. There's obviously some other items on here that, for example, stadium/transportation parking lot expansion. It's something that would be new. But at the same time, we'd really like to start securing our bus compound during athletic events and also providing that parking on that visitor side by where we're putting the new building as well as to the crossroads and so forth. So we were looking at parking lot expansion there. I think when it gets bid, if we go out for bid on it, and we would end up doing that based on bid, we would be closer to that, 120, 130 number based on what I've seen based on our past bids, based on asphalt. But what it would allows for it to be a double use parking lot during the day, transportation staff during the athletic events. It allows for overflow parking, and it allows us to go ahead and secure that compound down more so during those athletic events than it currently is. So that's one of those things that, when you go down the list of items, there's some things you can kind of look at and go, oh, well, we don't really need that right now. And that could be the case. Ultimately, when you look at them individually and you look at how it impacts the school, there's a lot of these that are very important. And then some of them are just part of a replacement cycle. For instance, every year we've been replacing sheds around the district as they're aging. And that's something that was on the plan before, like item number 24, shed replacement. So like we've been saying, this is a living document. There's things that may get shoved in next year, and we reevaluate and we rank and see how far we can get. But I guess that's kind of the thoughts behind this whole foundational document for us that we can work on through the future.
And so if I could this is why these discussions are so beneficial for us as we make these kinds of decisions. So I just want to give an example. So I'm glad, Joe said 1 through 17. If we stay within budget, that's what we're looking at. So if you look at, he talked a little bit about item 19, the parking lot expansion. So I want you this is what I want the board to think about. So items 19 and 20, they wouldn't make the cut, and that's fine, but this is the value in this conversation. These are two examples I want you to think about. So, think about when we have those huge events, these, a monster playoff game, and the whole community's there. And, we do shuttle buses, and there's not very much parking. Is it a must-have to have additional parking? No. But that's what I want. Those are the things I want you to think about, because then, versus, wow, this is so nice. When we have people come in to our district and they say, wow, look at all this parking. What a great facility. Wow, you can really tell, that kind of thing. And the same with the item number 20, the new lights at Christie Dennis Soccer Stadium. Over the last couple years, we've had incidents where the lights go out in the middle of games. And we've had that happen when we're hosting a state playoff game. And one of those games, we actually had to pick up the goals and move them over to the football stadium and move all the entire crowd over there and finish a high stakes game on a different field than what it was started. And so those lights are not a must have, but that's an example of, we talk about, hey, we just want to be the best we can be. But again, it's about, and I'm not saying Board of Education, we really need to do these things. I want you to think through that. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about. We're talking about warm, safe, and dry versus, wow, this facility's top notch because, and it's not just one. Those other things are projects that we're doing to take good care of our buildings, but to showcase what we have. But again, I'll go back to we're in a very uncertain, unstable time right now. And so those are some tough decisions for us. And, those are the pieces that I wanted to get flushed out in this conversation to have you think about, just to give your thoughts about, hey, team, we kind of feel like maybe you should go back and maybe you say, the general consensus is, the items 1 through 17 and that's not set in stone, but we feel good about that. Maybe we should kind of wait and see. So that's why we're here. And I just wanted to get you to that place to think through that, if that makes sense. So this is great discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly where I'm at. I mean, if we took care of warm, safe, and dry, let's start getting after it and see how far the budget takes us and then reevaluate at that point. Everything is so tentative in nature right now. Maybe we'll have a better feel for where we're at. You may not even need a parking lot expansion and new lights on the soccer and football stadium next year.
Right. That's very possible.
And, we're talking about a 50% increase in terms of proposed amount versus our current budget. So focus on what we have to do, and then let's reevaluate then would be my thought.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I mean, especially with what's going on. I mean, we have to also think about the fact that the economy is in a bad place. And there are going to be people impacted in our community. Property values, as far as property taxes that we get in, if we see, unfortunately, an increase in foreclosures, these things are possible. And so I think we have to focus on the things that we definitely can do. I'm with you, Billy. I definitely understand what you mean as far as those extra things that will just make, that wow sort of appeal and, add icing to the cake. But right now, we just need to get the cake. We need to get the cake baked and hold on to dear life for that cake. The icing will come when we get a little bit more stability and we sort of know where things are going. That's what I would, that's how I feel.
I would agree with that too.
Okay.
I have a question. One of the items is lockers at the high school the media center update. I apologize. And it looks like $36,000 were already spent in year 20. So if we say don't continue that, then is that setting up for our media center to be in a bad shape because we have said don't continue that work?
That money was actually allocated this fiscal year, but the work hasn't been completed. And with some of these things, we pulled us into this big project or into this big plan so we could just identify every little thing. Some of these are considered out of building funds, and Nancy can talk more about that, Ms. Lane. So with the media center, that money hasn't been spent yet, but it was going to be spent for that media center. The $36,000.
So a couple comments. First being that I know that it's difficult to rank things because, especially when there's so many items, you can start ranking things and realize, wow, something that's number 13 really should be number 4. But since there's so many items that are so close together, that's why numbers are difficult to realize that, yeah, the snow gems might not be ranked 12th. They might be higher. And the same with the gymnasium wall at East. It may actually be number 4, but just those other things are just slightly more important. So it doesn't mean that it's only the 8th most important things. So number 18 and 19 on our list might be very important things. But we need to realize that that's just because there's 17 things that are just slightly more important. When I first got on this board and back in 2014, one thing that we talked about was we don't want our buildings to be a Band-Aid. We don't want to just put Band-Aids on things. We don't want to just say we want to just fix things when they break, because that happened in probably the decade before that when we had very strict budget numbers. And a lot of our buildings fell into disrepair, and it took so much more money to bring them back up to where they needed to be than if we would just had spent the money during that time. So there might be things on number 17 through 32 that need to be done, not extremely important, but they may be there to prevent further damage that down the line may cost us even more. So I hope that we can take that into consideration when looking at this list. And of course, Mr. Penny, Mr. Smith, and Mrs. Lane to have a discussion about that, that if we don't do, say, the sewer at Crossroads, could that cause major damage to our buildings because we didn't find out what the problem was and fix it? The shed replacement, is there going to be equipment inside the shed that's going to be damaged and have to be replaced that's going to cost more than $4,000 because we didn't spend the $4,000 to replace the shed? So those are things I think that we need to look at and trust Mr. Penny, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Lane, the building principals, the maintenance staff to say that these are probably items that need to be done, but they're maybe not critical, but definitely need to be addressed, and if not this year, in the very near future. Of course, I also am fearful of what the near future brings with the way that things have been shut down. So I am a little bit hesitant to say, yes, just go do everything. But I think we need to consider as a board that there may be items that need to be done that are beyond number 17, because if they're not done, it may have a trickle-down effect on other things. So those are just my thoughts.
May I speak?
Yes, please.
Well, if we have the $1.92 million allocated, and obviously we're going to take care of the crucial items, depending on where things flesh out, there's certain things, for instance, the sewer at Donald. We don't know exactly what it'll take to repair that, and if there's major repair that's even needed. But I can say that we will do something to scope it, try to at least do the study and find out what's going on. Because as you mentioned and other people have mentioned, that's one of those things we need to look into. So the question is within that $1.92 million, ultimately it's really close to $2 million, we're definitely going to take care of those crucial things that we have to take care of. But can we have the flexibility and latitude to be able to take care of other items within that budget as we typically would in doing our operation? With this list, that was one of the things about getting all the items out there in the forefront. It's very open and transparent, and there might be a hidden item somewhere that even through all this assessment and all this that we've done that pops up and we have to take it and it reprioritizes things. But now at least we've identified all this. And if it wasn't for the pandemic, then we would still be evaluating things and being fiscally responsible. But we may have a different light on some of it, and I understand that. But it's just a great thing that we have this foundation in place, and we'll just keep rolling as a living document fiscal year after fiscal year.
So, kind of in conclusion, what I'm envisioning is, we have some additional conversation, Joe and Nancy and I, and we've had a lot of conversation about this document already, have a little bit more, and identify, keep, taking into consideration all of the feedback we've heard this evening, also taking a look at, hey, we can't really ignore this because if it's going to result in extra dollars spent, in the future, we really just can't turn our backs on that. So just balancing all that, trying to stay as close as we can as to what has been budgeted, keeping that in mind. And then also, I do want to say, I know we've talked about those snow gem ice guards on several occasions. Those things, I'm very hopeful that, they're coming in at $40,000 and $40,000 that, in a perfect world, that will be significantly lower because we will only put those where they absolutely need to be versus around the entire building. Maybe
Correct.
we just put them where students come in or where they exit. And I would think, and again, I'm not a snow gym ice guard expert, but I'd like to think that would save us some money, and we'll work really hard to save as much money as we can and get as many projects as we can get done, and take all of that feedback into consideration as we prioritize the list. So, again, not that we're not voting, just because consensus from the board, or is the board comfortable with us proceeding in that manner?
For what I'm hearing, I'm thinking that the board is in favor of you moving forward with doing some of these repairs and starting to get bids. If I'm not right on that, please chime in.
No, I agree. Let's get started. We certainly have money to spend and a priority list, so let's get started on them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions about that part of Joe's presentation? Comments? Great discussion. I mean, this is what, this is why we have these. I know they're lengthy, but it's so important moving forward in the future. So thank you so much for all of your feedback and commentary. And then if everyone's ready, I'll turn it back over to Joe for Building Our Future 2.0.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and share the other presentation. Okay, so this presentation goes along with the theme that we've had the last few meetings regarding building our future. Last meeting and then the beginning of the presentation for this meeting that I just did with you involved the 5-year planning and maintenance part that came out of the facility assessment. And this presentation is going to focus on where we are currently within the master planning process and provide details about our next steps. Some of these slides will look very familiar, but they're all part of the process. So as you saw last time with the 5-step plan, we've completed the facility assessment. We are currently in evaluation assessment results, and we did some of that this evening together as a team. And then now, this evening, we're going to talk more, and we're going to talk about the progress assessment. And that's utilizing decisions from steps 1 and 2. And we are currently in 2. And taking and seeing where we're at, whether we've reached a trigger point to move forward with establishing focus group and then establishing master plan, or if the timing's right, or if we need to do more consideration based on what we talked about this evening, and also what Mr. Thackeray is going to talk about beginning with the next slide in regards to what this would look like for us in the process we would be going through for the master planning. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Thackeray and let him begin by talking about the assessment summary. This assessment summary includes the planned improvements that we just talked about, but also, like I said, the facility assessment was extremely, extremely thorough. And we knew there'd be a lot of answers come out of it and questions based on those things that we saw. So we have the future master plan numbers as well as the planned improvement. And I will officially hand it over to you, Todd. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Penny. Good evening, guys. I'm happy to be with you to be able to report on the extensive research that Joe and I and a lot of your staff were involved in over the last year of identifying both their requirements, their needs, and their wants for their school facilities. And through that process of everything from your school buildings to your athletic facilities to your maintenance facilities, we came up with a large number if you were to do everything. but we're not focused on that. But what it does tell us is over in the second to the right-hand column, the dollars per square foot, the three highlighted boxes indicate the cost per square foot that Northwest, Creekside, and Crossroads, in that order, came out to for the requested repairs that were not just warm, safe, and dry, but also things like educationally appropriate and those kinds of components. So what this leads me to is the opportunity to master plan your district again. We first did this 10 years ago, or most recently did this 10 years ago, starting in the year 2010, when we engaged your district in a community-based process to look at the needs of all of your facilities and identify which facilities your community deemed should have more dollars put into for maintenance and which facilities you should consider for replacement. And that goes on things like age and condition of buildings, the enrollment and capacity of buildings, the educational appropriateness for the future of those buildings. And under the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission recommendations, they say that if a building costs more than 2/3 to renovate and maintain over time, they recommend replacing it. So that's just a benchmark to consider. And those three highlighted boxes are buildings that get into that range. And then the last thing I'd throw out is the maintenance standard. Jerry Durr with SHP and formerly with Northwest Local Schools developed maintenance plans for new buildings for a number of years for districts across the state. And he learned through that process that starting with a new building, it takes $2.50 to $3 per square foot to keep that building in a state of renewal for the life of the building. Think about that, $3 a square foot. Your district has approximately 1.3 million square feet of school buildings. And for that to start when a building is new, to keep it in that state is a high bar. But anyway, just to give you perspective, and when you start behind, if you were putting that much money into a building today that's 20 years old and have had nothing done to it, you're going to, if you put $3 a square foot into it, you would maintain it at the 20-year-old state it is in now. So anyway, this all ties into your opportunity to consider master planning your district and identifying which buildings long-term you keep and which buildings long-term you consider replacing. Okay, next slide.
Do you mind before we move to the next slide, just a clarification?
Sure.
You mentioned 3 schools being highlighted, and it's actually 4. Should that?
Yeah, it's 4.
Okay.
It's Northwest, Creekside, and Crossroads.
And Crossroads is significantly lower than the others, but they're still in that 2/3 range.
Well, if the state were to come in and assess, I think it would achieve the 2/3.
Okay.
But yeah. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions on that slide? Anyway, feel free to stop me at any point. Okay. And I mentioned some of this already. 2010 is when, this was 10 years ago, that we started the planning process for the 3 new buildings that you have now. So in 2013, the Ohio School Facilities Commission, which now has transitioned into the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, offered you 26% funding. In the district, through your community process, identified Central and Freshman as your greatest need, and then Compass came in as a capacity issue, became your first most important segment. And then in 2014, you passed the issue, and the state contributed the 26% funding for those 3 new buildings. Okay. All right. Your district leadership met with Ohio Facilities Construction Commission representatives 2 years ago now, with interest in updating the master plan and considering moving on to getting another 26% from the state for some additional improvements, whether they were renovations or new. The state representatives indicated at that point that there were about 100 school districts already in the queue that said they wanted money. And the state projected 7 to 8 years out before the state would be able to offer you funds for any improvement. Okay. Last year in 2019, because other school districts fell into this issue also that were ready to move forward with another improvement, legislation was passed to allow you to get back into what's called the Expedited Local Partnership Program, in which no state money is provided, but it allows you to do something that you think is important to do before the state is ready to give you money, but you would receive credit for that in the future. So if you build a $10 million building, you would receive $2.6 million of credit to another improvement in the future, or to pay down your debt when the state offers you money. So there's a program in place that allows you to go on into master planning with the state. Whereas before this legislation was passed, the state had no program for you to even participate with the state in developing a master plan in compliance with their standards. So at this point, the state will provide you free enrollment projections, free building assessment updates, and free master planning option calculations because of this legislation. Whether you move forward or not is ultimately up to you, but it gives you the opportunity to participate in that for free. Okay. This is just a diagram of one way to look at how a community engagement master planning process would work. And this is what we did with you back in 2010 and 2011. So what Joe calls a focus group, I call a community advisory team. So it's made up of representative staff and community members and even students representing all aspects of your community to come together to discuss the needs and make recommendations and to narrow down what might be acceptable to your community. Then we start out with educational and community value goals. The next step would be facility needs and site options. So facility needs is something that we just went through extensively. So we've got that in hand. The third step would be costs and finances, to understand what all these options, because of course, if there's no costs, if there's no hard side to this, everybody wants everything, but cost is always a reality. So we layer that in and look at how you could raise funds and what it would cost a taxpayer. And you take that on to the next step and say, community, what do you support? And this could involve polling. This involves community forums. This involves engaging with your community to find out what they think and what they would support. And through that, you get the answer of what master plan your community would support for you. And this can be over a long period of time, but it's just a process to understand where your community is and what makes sense with understanding all these pieces to your community. Okay. The next slide is just another way to look at it. Again, the community advisory team. And then there are 4 pillars: facilities, education, finances, and community that go through there. And from the top, there are town halls and polling that find the pulse of your community. And you eventually get to a master plan. And if you moved on into campaigns and things like that, would be sort of the flow of that. Okay.
So our end goal is to recommend a facility master plan to the Board of Education, as it says here. Definitely educationally appropriate. We have to be fiscally responsible. That's not just with the master plan, but everything we do. And then key is community supported to be able to get it done. So with that being said, I'd like to turn this over to discussion and any questions involving the presentation.
Any questions from the board? I do have one question, Mr. Thackeray. You said that in 2019, the State House passed legislation that we could join in this new program. Is there any feeling that that program may go away due to the recent maybe possible budgetary issues that the state may have due to the coronavirus?
It's always possible. Most people don't believe it will go away. Most people believe that it could slow down. But just from all the districts that have received benefit from this process, and all the need that's still out there, and the lack of the Durolf decision being fixed in some other way, this is still the one way that they can create equity across the state.
And so it may be just further down the line that we get the money back from the state via credits.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what I believe. It's up to each legislature, though, every 2 years.
Todd?
And, I have a couple questions. I think that's the piece that Michael's talking about is pretty important. So could you talk a little bit about couple questions I have. So if a district decides to go through that process that you've mentioned is free, in the end, if they go through that process, though, they may decide to go a different direction. Is there any penalty to that, or is that a route that other districts are considering? And I don't mean to throw all these questions at you at once, but
no, it's completely allowed.
Okay.
I mean, basically, the state enters into an agreement with you in good faith that you have intention to make facility improvements and would like to go through the process with their involvement. And there is no requirement on their part that you adopt and move forward with any piece of that at the end of it. There have been districts that have picked one building to do with state money, again, when state money is being offered, and choose another building to do just with their own funds and do a lesser, more limited process. So the state has no prohibition against that. They would like you to make good use of their time and money they spend toward you, but it doesn't have to be with them.
And the community advisory team process, that's separate from that. So that's right. That doesn't go together, correct?
Well, it does go together. The state information feeds. Correct. But the state doesn't facilitate that. That's something that we could do. Right. That's a separate piece, but it is integral with that to take their good information and share the subjective information with the community.
And my last question is, as a result of, because Michael asked about the possibility of this going away, and I had heard that even before COVID-19, speculation that might happen. Have you found, is it your experience that districts are some of them are not engaging here and just going about this their own way? I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Some are, in particular, when you get, above less than 10% state funding in a project. But they've even now created the alternative funding program where every district in the state can participate in some way. And the alternative program gets every district the alternative of taking $1 million or 10% of their OFCC co-funded master plan as basically a buyout and you get that money, essentially no strings attached, but you're done with the program. You're no longer eligible for anything from them. So in my opinion, it makes sense for any district to look at the potential benefit of doing this. And their standards are very close to what you would do without them involved at this point. And they've become flexible with educational visioning, like you know from the past projects. So you can write your own standards.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. The 26%, that was based on projections that we had, I don't know, 8 years ago. I'm not sure as to how long ago those that percentage was determined. And it was based on the financial wherewithal, you know, the percentage of businesses in our district, and also the economic demographics of our district. So what I'm wondering is the 26%, is that set in stone? I mean, because things in our district have changed. Does it have any flexibility that would allow us to look at where the district is now? You know, because the financial demographics have changed a little bit. Would we possibly be able to qualify for more if there were the ability to look at the recent or the new or updated demographics of the district? Is that at all possible?
Under the current legislation,
because the 26%.
Sadly, sort of.
Okay, sounds like phantom revenue, essentially.
Well, what the
Lena asked the
every
same
year
question.
Every year the state redoes their equity rankings, and the equity, what you're referring to, is basically your district's tax valuation divided by the number of students. So that's right. We can look at what you are, of where the district is, but this is something that they have not wavered on since the programs have become more flexible and allowed you to segment and do programs in a variety of different ways. But once you enter into an agreement, whether it's a CFAP, which is what you entered into in 2014, that agreement by law sets that state local share for the rest of this program. So sometimes you win and sometimes you lose by that. But anyway.
I see. Wow.
And I haven't calculated to see where you are now.
All right.
Right.
Yeah.
It can all be changed with legislation, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We won't hold our breath.
Other
on
questions?
Are there any other questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Thackeray. Thank you, Minnie.
Good to see you.
Before we move on, can we kind of get a sense from the board, you know, about how the board feels about us initiating moving forward with, you know, building our future 2.0 and that process? You know, we've talked about it a couple different times, and we were very clear in our communication, you know, even a couple years ago when we started, that this isn't about, you know, running a bond issue in a couple months, you know, in November or anything. This is simply the process so that we have a plan in place, so that when we decide it's time, we have it, and we have that portion of the work completed. So just would like to hear from the board how you feel about that, and also if you have any strong feelings about engaging in that program that would result in us banking that 26%, engaging in that free, that process that would be at no charge to the district. So I'll turn it over and would just like to hear from the board how you feel about that.
I'm definitely in favor of moving forward with the process. It doesn't commit us to anything. I think it's just being strategic and looking towards the future. And I know I've said before, I was a part of the process the first time and recognize the value that it provides us and our community. So I'm completely in favor of moving forward. I know, right now, having focus groups together isn't something we can, we couldn't do it tomorrow. We can't have a bunch of groups of people tomorrow. So I think time will kind of dictate when we could start that part of the process, but I'm in favor of moving ahead when we can.
I am as well, definitely. You have to plan for the future. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to not do that.
I agree with that as well. As long as we're upfront with people and we let them know, like, hey, we're not asking money for this right away, because we don't know what the short-term future holds right now. But it's definitely a good idea to start thinking about it and start planning for it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. There are certainly a lot of question marks out there, as we've all alluded to. And at some point, we've got to reconcile the money that we're talking about spending on repairs versus new construction and all these things. And so you better start game planning.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's we at least have to get our plan together. So I think it's a wise idea to enter into discussions with the community and to start the process with the state. At least then we have a placeholder in place. And like Mr. Harris said, we would not have had those 3 buildings built had we not been prepared with our master plan when the state said, okay, it's your turn. So I think it's very wise for us to start the process of at least having an updated master facilities plan.
Okay, thank you so much. And then our last presentation is in honor of our retirees, and unfortunately we are unable to honor them in a formal manner, but we plan to do that later once we're able to do so. But tonight we would just like to recognize them. So at this time I'll turn it over to Gina.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Well, under different circumstances, we would typically be all under one roof and celebrating the accomplishments of our retirees. So since we can't do that at this time, we want to acknowledge their dedication to the children of the Fairfield City School District. We have 2 groups. The first group is the individuals who announced their retirement after our ceremony last year. So the 2018-2019 retirees were, or are, Sonia Aguila, Diane Cantrell, Joyce Arnold, Berdella Goetschel, Kathy Brown, and Pamela Matthews. And the 2019-2020 retirees so far this year are Kathleen Smith, Lois Kutzinger, Karen Heatherton, Roberta Keller, Grace Bunker, Karen Hudson, Iva Johnson, Michael Rosser, Beth Baltzell, Mary Donovan, Ray Raines, John Campbell, Sharon Haas, Lisa McCune, Darlene Cochran, and Lois Allen. We thank all of our retirees for their service to our students, and we wish them nothing but the best in retirement. We will have a more formal recognition for everyone once it's safe for us to gather as a group. That's all I have.
Any comments from the board?
just thank you. That's a lot of names, a lot of good, lot of amazing people. So I just thank you. And I look forward to celebrating you the way that we want to celebrate you. Thank you. That'll be hard to replace. That's a big list.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, same here. Yes, Mrs. Bunker, she taught DJ. It's one of my favorites. There's a lot of names in there. There are a lot of names in there that are definitely people that I'm gonna miss. But congratulations, and we look forward to celebrating you guys appropriately when we can. But thank you for everything you've done for the kids. Thank you for all of your dedication and hard work to the district.
Yeah, I would agree, and it certainly goes without saying they deserve more than to just have their name read at a live streamed board meeting. Their years of service are greatly appreciated, and we will celebrate them in the future.
Yeah, I wish I had Mr. Hare's poem that he used to read, or his little list of things to tell the retirees to do. But I do remember he always said the best thing for them to do is to learn to say no. Take some time to themselves and to their family, and enjoy retirement before they get involved in other activities. So thank you all very much. I look forward, like the rest of the board, to be able to celebrate your dedication to our children and our district in the near future. So thank you all very much. Okay, any other comments?